Hey there, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis, and today's episode was such a fun conversation to have. I got to really kind of explore language in a way that I haven't gotten to before. First off, I hope that you had a fantastic new year. Welcome to 2026. This is the first episode of the new year. And we'll see where this year takes us. I not gonna put too much pressure on it because I feel like every time we put pressure on a year to be great, it turns into a pandemic. So 2026, we're looking forward to having a year with you. So you know, this episode was really fascinating to me because we often think of English, at least I often think of English as being either British English or American English or, any variation thereof. But we really had a great conversation in this episode about how English is constantly morphing and is the point of the language is to be constantly changing and updating and moving forward. It's not a language that easily stands still and has a lot of really strong roots in its grammar and in the actual words that are used. A lot of that is all very, very recent in the history of the language. So we get to talk about the differences between academic English and regular spoken mainstream English, as well as other Englishes that are used in the US specifically today. And my guest is Travis Hubbard. Travis is a scholar of Black language, composition, and writerly identity whose work deconstructs mainstream's ways of knowing. Known as the Trill Professor, he centers Black language as a legitimate site of knowledge production and reimagines classical pedagogy through innovative approaches like teaching rhetorical writing skills via rap, beef, and hip hop. His research advocates for linguistic justice by validating the cultural and linguistic practices that students bring to the classroom. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Travis Hubbard. Get the scary lady to say recording in progress. But yeah, it has been a long week and it's only Wednesday, so I'm glad that I get to have a chance to sit down and be forced to do nothing else but have a conversation.
Of course, especially an academic nerdy one like this one.
Exactly. So, right up at the top, I was wondering, do you mind telling me just a little bit about your academic journey and how you got to where you are, the degrees you have, and why you chose the topics that you studied?
Sure. How much time do we have? I mean, it's quite a story, I will tell you. I'll try to give you as much of a Reader's Digest version as possible, but also some of it really matters to how I actually landed in this spot. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas. Grew up in sort of an urban area of Dallas, Texas. I went to school in Oak Cliff. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that area, given you're not even from here. But some people listening to this, watching this, will go, "Oh, okay, I know where that is." Yeah, so I went to school in Oak Cliff, kindergarten through 12th grade. And when it was time for me to graduate high school, I was probably like number three, number four in my class. I was doing pretty well, and I just was like, "Well, I want to go to the top school in Texas, one of the top schools." I had no idea about financial literacy, had no idea necessarily, about majors and minors because I was a first generation college student in my family and in my immediate family for sure. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go to Baylor University, which is, again, one of the top universities here in Texas. And so I only applied there and one other school, which was also out of state. So I did an out of state just because and somewhere in my mind, I was like, I want to get away from Texas and I wanted to go to a place where it snowed. So I applied for the University of
Mm.
Colorado at Boulder and Baylor University. So I just said, oh, my grades are good enough. I'm going somewhere. And so I ended up getting into both schools, but I got into Baylor first, and it had been, my dream school for a long time. So I just went, not even really paying attention to a bill. I had sort of heard of financial aid, but not really understanding how it worked. And of course, my parents, well, I was raised by a single mom. So my mom, she didn't really understand it, either. But my mom is a heavy go getter. She is you can do anything, you can build anything in your backyard. You just need the materials. And so in her mind, she said, well, I've been working 2, 3 jobs all my life. So you can go to whatever school you want to and I will help you with the bill. Okay. So about 2 weeks before I went to undergrad, my mom came home and we had this sort of ritual where I would wait in the living room for her to get home. And I heard the garage come up. And so I was doing my thing. I go to the garage door, I open it, and, I greet her whenever she's coming to the garage door. Well, this particular day, somebody else was bringing her home. And so I thought that was odd, and she got out of their car with this huge box. Again, I'm thinking that is also odd. So she just goes into her room. She doesn't say much. She just goes into the room, shuts the door. And probably about 2 hours or so later, she comes out and she's like, okay, I had a really hard day, but I'm ready to talk now. And so, of course, my questions are, well, what's up with the box and, where's your car? And so she says, well, I got fired today. That would explain the box. And I said,
Mm.
okay, well, where's your car? And she said, well, when I came out, my car had also been repossessed. So my mother lost her job and her car was repossessed in the same day.
Ooh.
Right. 2 weeks before I was set to go to one of the most expensive universities in Texas and in the country. It is a private institution.
Mm.
And so she said to me, I'm not really sure if college is really on our ticker right now because now we have other priorities. But I was already set. Like I was already, I had already told the University of Colorado that I wasn't attending. And so I just said, you know what? I'm going to just go for as long as I can. So I ended up going, long story short, it got really expensive. And so I left. So this is where it gets really, really, journey like. so 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 I left there and I ended up going to Oklahoma State University. I had a couple friends that were going there. There was a young lady there that I was dating. She went there and I said, okay, I'm gonna go to a cheaper school. But again, because I'm first generation, I'm not thinking that an out of state school will still be more expensive than me just going to a public school. But I was so dead set on, for whatever reason, not going to a Texas public university. I felt like, and this is so silly thinking back now, I felt like, well, these regular students went to these public Texas schools. Like, I worked, my tail off. I was AP this, AP that, dual credit, this, whatever. So I'm just being silly. So I go out of state. I stay there for a while, only to finally click to me, well, this is just as expensive, just in a different way.
Mhm.
So I decide, okay, well, let me transfer somewhere else. So this will be school number three. And a lot of my friends were going to school in Houston at the time, in Houston, Texas. And so I said, okay, well, let me go to Texas Southern University, which is a historically black college and university here. We call them HBCUs. So I went there. It was cool. I finally felt like I was, able to pay for college on my own. I was, getting through my academics. I felt good about it, but I was homesick. It's
Mm.
so odd. It's so odd. I did all of this moving around, and I eventually got homesick. And I said, you know what? I want to come home. So I said, let me finally look into a college that's near where I grew up, which was UTA, the University of Texas at Arlington. And I got in. But the universe is very funny. So I I was getting ready to go to the school. Then I got this letter in the mail from the federal government saying that I was being investigated for financial aid fraud because I had hopped around so many schools in such a short amount of time. And
Ugh.
right. And so I needed to provide all of my official transcripts for the schools that I had gotten financial aid money from, which seems simple enough. However, because Baylor and Oklahoma State were too expensive, I never paid my bill there. So I was essentially starting over at the universities that I was going to. So
Mm.
I had to sit at home for a semester or two. I worked. And with the help of my family, I was able to pay off my tabs there just to finally be able to get financial aid at University of Texas at Arlington, to be able
Mm.
to finally, be in the right courses that I'm in.
Yeah.
And that is where I got my bachelor's of English in. So quite a long story, but totally worth it. Because also, I tell, especially when I'm mentoring high school students, I tell them all the time that, if I could graduate, somebody like me graduate going to, 4 or 5 schools, balancing working full time, you totally can. And the story is important, I think, because I not only went to multiple schools, I went to different types of schools. So started out with a
Mm.
a luxury private institution, then going to an out of state public institution, then going to an HBCU, then coming home. So it's just I've just seen it all. I've done it all. Got the T-shirt, got the wristband, and and also funnily enough, because my mom had just lost her job, and because I realized just how poor we were at the time, just because of the situation, I was dead
Mhm.
set on getting a job in technology because
Mm.
that's where I heard that's where the money was. People are making money in technology. And I remember calling my mom in college and I was saying, like, hey, I don't think this college thing is for me. I'm not really being successful. It's not really fun. And my mom said, well, it's because you're not doing what you've been called to do. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, you've been a writer your whole life. You need to go and be a writer, do something that has to do with writing, something that has to do with reading. And I said, well, I could be a teacher probably, but they don't make any money. And and my mom said back to me, so keep in mind, my mom is now living on a family member's couch. She's still looking for jobs. And so even through that lens, she tells me, you have to follow your heart. If you follow your heart, you'll never work a day in your life and the money will take care of itself. And so because she was in that position and was able to give me that advice in that position, I took it as like the law of the land. And that's when I finally switched to being an English major. And I just my academic life just took off. So as soon as I finished my bachelor's, probably I took off a year, went and got my master's at Texas Southern. So I went back to the HBCU that I was in undergrad with, and they remembered me, and they said, "Oh yeah, man, come on! Like we were hoping you got your bachelor's with us, but look, give us another chance. Let's get the master's now." So I got my master's in English literature, and then probably I would say 2 years after getting my master's, I was getting the itch again. I was getting bored, and I said, "Man, do I really want to go get a doctorate? Is that crazy? Is that a wild thing to think about?" And so I was teaching high school seniors at the time, and they were all bringing their essays to me and their applications to me, and I was kind of looking through some, and I kept seeing Texas Women's University, and I said, I should look them up. So I looked them up, and they had a PhD program in literacy, language, and culture that was hybrid. So I didn't have to be there all the time. I could take a couple of those courses online and then do a couple in person. And I just was like, man, I don't know. And I just kept looking around, kept looking around, kept looking around. And it seemed like the only true PhD program where I could do that type of work. And I still kind of pushed it off to the side until one day a friend of mine who was getting her PhD at Howard University in DC, she sent me a call for presentation, and I looked at the editorial board for that presentation, and it just so happened to be the department chair for the PhD program that I was thinking about getting into. And so I felt the nudge from the universe saying like, hey, you said you want to be in the work. These people are still doing work. These people haven't gotten the PhD and just kind of chilling. They're doing the thing. And so I just made the decision. I applied. Again, I applied to 2 schools, got into both. But I ultimately went with Texas Women's just because of the consistent activist type work that they were doing.
Mm.
in linguistics and literacy and beyond. And so I've been in the program for about 3 years or so. I just hit candidacy, so I'm no longer in classes. I'm officially writing my dissertation. So I just finished.
Yay.
I know, right? I just finished my outline, and once that's approved, then I'll officially write the proposal, and then hopefully we just go from there. We do some research, do some data collection, and we'll be a doctor in a year or so. So yes, that is how I landed up here.
That's amazing. I mean, it is, like you said, it is important to tell those stories because sure, there's the privileged few who go directly through and have it really easy and get their bachelor's and immediately go into their master's and then immediately go into their PhDs. I've even heard of some like 21-year-olds now who are going straight from their bachelor's into their PhDs, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like,
Yeah,
not in a bad way, but just like, you are
yeah,
insane.
yeah,
Breathe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
So like,
seriously, breathe, and because I think a part of your PhD is having life experiences that
yeah.
push the research. But I digress.
No, for sure. But back to the point is just that sure, it's easy for some people, but what I'm hearing more often than not is people getting their PhDs are people who have had a rough go of it or haven't known what they wanted to do for a long time. But there's just this kind of like thing they keep coming back to time and again in their life that they're just like, oh, this is going to happen. I mean, for myself, that was something that happened too. Like I went and got my bachelor's in music and then my master's in music right after that, and then decided I hated music and didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore, and took 10 years off before being like, no, now okay, it's time to go back to school. It's been on the back of my head, like, just have to do it. I won't be happy ever if I don't do it. And finally went back and got my second master's degree, and now I'm applying to PhD programs. It's people doing PhDs and people doing research are not, eventually there's an ivory tower that is created. But the people who, at least anymore, who are getting PhDs are people who are clawing and fighting for it.
Right,
Like, it's not, and I think that's a huge misunderstanding in our world right now, that it's these brainiacs who sit in a room and talk to just themselves and they don't have any kind of life experience or anything, and they're just sitting there with their books in an echo chamber. And it's like, no, these are people who just can't imagine doing anything else,
right.
and
Absolutely,
most of
absolutely.
us have tried.
Yeah, we have. And then you come back to this. I love my PhD program, but you come back to this sort of mental torture, because
Yeah.
you're always wrestling with ideas. And when in my case at least, now that I've put these lenses on and I've really wrestled with my epistemology, I now cannot gaze upon the world without some sort of analysis that is always working in my mind. So,
And it
yeah,
ruins your life. It
it
really
does.
does. Like, I cannot watch a movie anymore. I will go to a movie theater and like halfway through enjoying a movie, I'm just like, oh no, this is what this movie's actually
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. Or, does that pass the Bechdel test? You're
Yeah,
just
just
consistently thinking about all of the theories and paradigms that are existing around these moments. So I totally get it, and I always tell my friends, because nobody in my friend group is a PhD. I have doctors in my friends, but most of them are MDs, and it's
mm,
just different. It's just a different
yeah.
thought process, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it's a PhD, and it's because we're constantly thinking through the philosophies of our world and how we move through the world and how we experience the world. And it's definitely a blessing and a curse, because you can't ever get away from it once you've started it.
Right, right, right.
And your particular area of study is you're looking at sociolinguistics and um the racist tendencies around academic language specifically. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I like to. Man, so I'll tell you, when I first got into my PhD program, I was very interested in African American vernacular English. At least that's what I was calling it at the time. And then,
Mm,
I realized that I was getting into the program at a time where the field was really looking at terminology, moving away from that, because the putting the word vernacular inside of the phrase sort of creates this idea that it is not its own linguistic system. It is not. It doesn't. It's not rule governed, so on and so forth. And so now the term is Black language, Black English, sort of depending on who you're speaking to. And so for me, I grew particularly interested in the way that your body is not only seen, but the way that your language use is seen and
mm,
heard physically, but also heard even when you're on the phone with someone and you sort of are guessing what racial group they're a part of, what community they're a part of, what culture they're a part of, so on and so forth, based on just word use. And so I grew particularly interested in those things. And I would say as the program went on, I really started to blend in my background of what I knew about English literature and rhetoric and composition to think
mm.
about in what ways do students who use Black English or Black language feel ostracized as a writer or a reader or a speaker or not? Just what does that look like? What does that positionality look like inside of our classrooms here? Um, I would say that is the sort of umbrella that I'm looking at now.
Well, I mean, as much as white students who are going into these spaces have trouble with academic English, I can only imagine coming into those spaces as someone who is part of a group that has been systematically kept out of those spaces and whose language has been purposefully separated away. Like I can't even imagine the extra work one must do in order to join those spaces,
Yeah.
just because someone at some point said, no, this is how our language has to be, and if you don't do that, you're less than.
Right, right. And I think a layer that I try to offer to teachers, because I am not always attacking teachers in terms of their language ideologies. We have language ideologies just like we have ideologies about a lot of things because of our ecology, our environment. I actually more do a lot of picking at education programs that exist inside of universities. Why is there
Mhm,
not a more critical approach to how we think about language or how we think about writing and reading, so on and so forth? Because you only know what you know.
mhm,
And so I think my job now that I look at as far as teacher implications is I try to coach teachers through sort of unpacking some of their ideologies about what it means to be a reader, writer, thinker, and speaker inside of a classroom. Things like reminding people that, the dictionary was, Noah Webster's way of just making a little money back in the day, right?
mhm.
Or
Yeah.
just about how, grammar books came about as some sort of, um, I want to use the word agenda, but I know that that word's kind of triggering. So what I really want to say is, some of those grammar books were a part of a religious movement of righteousness and what it meant to
Mm,
be moral and ethical. And so once we sort of unpack some of that, you start to see that a lot of our rules and systems are not really rooted in anything that's natural. It's more
mm,
just rooted in who just so happened to be in power at the time that those books and that language system was codified. Now, I do say this with the caveat too, though, that I realize that standardized assessments they exist, and those standardized
mhm,
assessments often come with a rubric that prioritizes and that rewards the use of what is often referred to as standard English conventions or a command of standard
mm.
English conventions. And so I'm always in the middle of wrestling with teachers saying, like, okay, heard you. I know that there's a standardized test, but we can still appreciate in this way, and we can still teach the command in a way that empowers students and makes them feel like I'm making a
Yeah.
stylistic choice as opposed to the way that I'm speaking, writing is somehow less than, like, in the terms you've just used. I think that's the subtle difference or the shift that I'm asking teachers to make.
Well, and it makes sense to think about it in those terms as well, because if you're going into education with just the ideology that you want to tell students what they should think, that's completely incorrect. Like,
Right.
education is there to get students to think, and in order to inspire that thinking and inspire that learning, you need to meet them where they are, even if there is some set of arbitrary rules that eventually they need to understand at some level. You still shouldn't expect them to have those rules right up at the front and know those rules and use them constantly from the beginning if that's not where they've come from.
Correct.
Like, I mean, I grew up on the internet in the age of where we would even use the term grammar Nazi. Like, we were so intent on, in the early years of social media and the internet, just being like, you didn't put that comma there and you didn't put a
Right.
period there. And it's like, it doesn't, I mean, I'm saying this as someone who took part in that culture. Like,
Yes.
I love grammar. It's truly one of my greatest joys. I am Aunt Josephine from A Series of Unfortunate Events. Um, but at the same time, in most cases, it doesn't matter if you're getting your point across. If the other person understands what you're trying to say, then there's no barrier to that grammar. I mean, I've
Right.
really, understood that as I moved to France and I'm learning a new language, and people are speaking to me in English who are French, and I'm speaking to them in French. And it always makes me laugh when French speakers say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my English is terrible," and I'm like, I understand you completely. Like, I
Right.
know what you're saying. If I speak French to you, you won't understand what I'm saying because I don't have any bit of your language really mastered at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you at least know enough words that you can describe it and we can get to a point where we understand each other, whether or not the grammar is there and the structure of things are there. So it's just so wild to me that there are educators that are unwilling to, how do I say this without being rude? Because I mean, I too, I hold teachers that I want to be a professor. Like, that's,
Yeah.
I'm not being down on teaching as a career path, but it's just wild to me that there would be a teacher out there who would say, no, I'm not going to listen to you until you figure this stuff out on your own, when the whole point is to help them get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. When I when I interview teachers, whether it's for research or not, what I think is I have a lot of empathy for is a lot of teachers who are resistant to adopt a critical language awareness are really of the mind of, well, I don't want to send them to the next grade unprepared, or I don't want to send
Mm,
them to college unprepared, which I get. And again, when you're up against these huge standardized tests, especially the way we are in
yeah,
Texas, you even my teachers that want to do right by all children feel like they're stuck into a rock and a hard place.
yeah.
Uh, so I think that's where the tools in the that's why I like rhetoric so much, because when you're able to teach language choice or style as an intentional rhetorical move, then like I said earlier, you empower instead of making people feel less than, which I think is the whole goal. And what I try to do even in my composition courses, because I also teach at a community college, is I try to show them different patterns of speech that they probably use, show them why that's
Mm,
elevated, it's actually nuanced and it's incredible and it's intelligent, but then also explain that there are some norms that we're working up against in our society. Here's how you do both, and you get to choose. And when you make that choice, you can say explicitly in your writing, I am choosing to write like this because, or here is my
mm,
command of standard English conventions. I mean, even we'll look at the argument between Stanley Fish and Prashant Ashanti Young. What constitutes as real English? What constitutes as academic English? Especially in a composition space. So I'm able to
mm,
show them those debates and show them that there are linguists and scholars and even composition scholars that are fighting for the right for them to be able to speak and write however they want to as a form of communication. It is not all just on one side where everyone is saying speak standard English or use the conventions of standard English, because what does that mean? What and that's a question that I pose to a lot of my teacher friends is, when you say that, what does that mean?
Mm. I mean, I came up against that. So doing a second master's degree 10 years after your first really kind of messes with one's head. Because I mean, first off, my first master's was a practical degree. It wasn't a research degree.
Hmm.
And so coming back into an academic space a decade after that and then going the research route really kind of pushed me into a group of people that I hadn't really experienced yet. Like I'd been around them, but I hadn't had to communicate with them in the same way. And so all of a sudden I was just sitting there and people were using all of these words, and I'm an avid reader, I'm an academic, but they're using these words that they've clearly made up, or they read once in some journal somewhere that they were like, ooh, that's a big word, I'm going to use that word and feel smart.
Yeah.
And then no one around them knows what they're talking about, or it's just a word on a poster somewhere that you're like, you clearly just put that there to make yourself look special. Do you want people to engage with you? Because if you don't, we'll just give you that attention and move on. But like, if you want that
Yeah.
engagement, you need to work with the people. I mean, the the example that I come back to time and again is Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Papers, because they were purported to have been written so that farmers of the 18th century could understand it, but there's no way. There's I'm sorry, there's no way. When you read his letters next to Madison's letters, next to Jay's letters, the other two totally understandable.
Right.
And his letters, he's talking in circles, he's using the biggest possible words. Like, he is obviously thinks he's fantastic and is trying to confuse people so that he can uh do whatever he wants and get them to agree with him just because they want to feel smart too. And that's how I feel a lot of academia acts, is this like lexicon of words. There's
Right.
me using one of those words, but like this big dictionary of words
Right.
that only they know, and that in a way signal to other academics this is someone that you can feel smart next to, rather than being in that situation in order to find information that makes the world a better place.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point about accessibility, and my mind is pinging in all these different places, because even if we study the history of Greek rhetoric, we know that some of the Greek, the famous Greek rhetoricians wanted things to sort of be handed out in two different ways, in the sort of academic way and a sort of way for the commoner to understand. So even back then, it was important for us to create some sort of accessibility, which brings up an entirely different conversation about the accessibility to academic spaces in the first place. but
Yeah.
but but when we think about access inside of our classrooms and what we allow or what we gatekeep from students based on their perceived banks of knowledge, it's twofold to me almost. It's because I feel like on one hand we deny access because a student does not yet have a command of standard English conventions in the way that we would like. But then on the other hand, we refuse to see their what funds of knowledge. We refuse to see their funds of knowledge as a possible resource that can be tapped into to not only one, engage with whatever standard English conventions rubric that may exist because of whatever standardized assessment that we're trying to be successful at, but we also fail to see that perhaps we don't have the same fund of knowledge that our students do. And so perhaps that's a chance for some transfer of knowledge for them to be able to teach us something as well. And then for us to go, oh, boom, since you've mastered that thing, let me show you how those two things link. I mean, it's the same way of like second language acquisition theory, even if we want to look at it from a translingual or a translanguaging standpoint. Whatever I have already, if I can master it there, I can master it here. The issue
Mm.
I see is that a lot of teachers are not allowing that parallelism to exist between those two things to be able to say, hey, you've already mastered this. You definitely can master this. What I see is happening now is sort of this, I use like a fairy banking model, right? There is this idea that if I can unscrew your brain off and deposit my knowledge in and screw it back in, you should know it. That's all you need to know. Rid yourself of whatever else you've been doing, because that's not real knowledge. And I think that is the tension, because our students, they are not robots. They are not this sort of programmable calculator. These are real humans with flesh and blood, and that flesh and blood has experience attached to that DNA. And when that experience is denied, we find ourselves in a sort of corner of, well, what is really happening in education, and are we really developing critical thinkers in the way that we say we want to? That is my major critique of a lot of teaching styles currently, is we are often upset with our students because they lack critical thinking skills. And I always push back to teachers and say, well, does our current educational system really allow for critical thinking in the first place? And so we
It
can't
was
want
not
it.
made to do that.
Right. We can't want it when we want it, and not want it when it's not feasible for us. So I think that there's the bumping that is running up against each other. Truly.
Well, I mean, that's a really important point that, I mean, has come up on this podcast in the past, but I will scream it to the hills until the day I die, that the American school system was created as a way to make factory workers. They didn't
Of
want
course.
people to
Of course.
think. It
Right.
was set up very purposefully in the case of another world war.
Correct.
And so they wanted people who could take orders and knew how to live in an authoritarian state, and not ask any extra questions. So critical thinking was absolutely not part of that
Right.
curriculum. And we're now seeing the effects of 80 years of that system being set up. Like, it's wild that we expect more from a system that verifiably, like, I'm not just saying this out of my ass, like, this is like on paper written down. These are the things we want out of this system.
Correct.
uh
Correct. We are very lockstep. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, in the same way that classrooms are set up in rows, like,
yeah.
or that you walk in lines from places to play. I think we, I will say that often teachers are not critical to question some of those practices and to just think through, even if that is the best hallway management system. I don't know. I've never taught elementary where they are predominantly in lines, but even if, how did we get here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I think it's so important that people are studying what you're studying, is because when people from communities outside of that community that set itself up as the power,
Right.
when other communities come in and challenge that power and come in with their own cultures and their own languages and their own ways of being, it scares the people in power, because they've set up things that no one has ever questioned, because the people under them didn't know that they needed to question it. So when these new people come in and say, oh, but excuse me, this is actually systemic racism, like what you are doing, they're not going to like it. And it's going to break people,
Right.
because they haven't ever had to consider those systems before. And they just kind of blindly followed them because they thought that it was set up in their best interest, when it really absolutely wasn't.
Yeah, which of course is how hegemony operates in the first place.
Yeah.
All of these things just go unquestioned. And even when I am talking to people of color, who, my bias and my assumption is that they will immediately cling on to the type of work that I do because it liberates some of their practices. Even people of color push back on some of the work that I do more so actually than I was prepared for. Um,
Mm,
because for so long it's been taught to us that if we do not have these things, if we do not have a command of standard English conventions, then we will not be allowed that job promotion or to get into a good college or to be taken seriously by a doctor. And I don't fault them for that, and I don't actually disagree, by the way.
mhm.
um, I think my goal is just for the awareness to exist.
Yep. Well, because if you're not aware, you can't change how you behave.
Right. Right. And I can't push back intentionally, but again, acknowledging some privilege here, I recognize that, by, almost being a doctor or being a PhD candidate, I have a lot of privilege in being able to go into a space and talk however I want to talk
Hmm.
because I can back it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if somebody calls me out on any language use, we just don't have that conversation. But but not all of the people that are from where I'm from have that privilege to be able to do that. And so I feel like they are often grasping at whatever conventions of,
Mm,
of normalcy, whatever conventions of hegemony that they can
yeah.
clasp onto so that they can feel worthy to be a part of particular spaces. So I also acknowledge that tension as well.
Well, and something you said earlier just kind of struck a chord with me, the idea that a lot of these grammar rules were set up by religious institutions. And
Sorry, I stayed near a train station. That just
no,
means
but
that
that was perfect timing.
that just means that somebody is walking across the train track as they're
I kind of don't want to edit that out just because that was great. Religion, blah.
yeah.
but ooh. So I mean, but you were talking about how religious institutions were some of the people who are really pushing for these grammatical rules and for standardizing the language. And it made me think about growing up in the church and having, like, I'll say something that I don't think is bad, and then out of nowhere some like church mom looks at me and is like, no, 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 language, and really starts policing how you say things,
Yeah.
and like that there are certain spaces for certain types of words, and like um even the idea of taking the Lord's name in vain or swearing. Like, swearing does not mean a quote unquote bad word
Right.
in scripture. It just has taken on that meaning because it was a way to conform how people spoke so that they could control how people were thinking.
Correct. Correct. And I am not a religious scholar, so I will not pretend to be. But I am aware that even in the translations of certain religious texts, the way that we are keywording things now to mean one thing, that word either did not exist or it didn't
Hmm.
exist in the same way that in our contemporary language we're using it for. So I mean, and that would be another example even too.
I mean, yeah, it's just language is language is but no,
Language is that's the
language
article.
is there's the title of the episode. But no, it's so it seems so obvious once you start asking just a question or two about why language is the way it is, that it just starts unraveling, and that the the thread just comes right out of the garment. Like
It
it's
is.
not
It is.
it, it's it's not hidden.
Yeah,
like
it's just slapping there. You just gotta tug at it.
yeah, and that's what I love about language. And I mean, as a sociologist, that's something that I always look at when I'm looking at maybe a group of people that I don't understand as well or don't have as much information about. I will look at their language and I'll look at the things around them that helped form that language. because that really speaks to what and who a culture
Yeah,
is how
absolutely.
they're communicating with each other.
Absolutely. Which I imagine is fascinating because you're even thinking through histories of colonization to
Mhm.
even follow, why you even speak the language that you're speaking now, because your ancestors' land was stolen from them 600 years ago. You might have
Yeah.
been speaking this, insert some indigenous language.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, something that you said, or something in one of the articles that you sent me that it said was just using the word Englishes rather
Yes,
than the singular word English. It's that just the multitude of Englishes that are out there, and it really made me kind of stop and consider the fact that, I mean, English as a language is a beautiful language because it's almost created to morph and change and pick up new words and be constantly moving and evolving. But at the same time, we're just so stuck in these rules that were created not even at the beginning of the language. We're looking at rules that were created in the like 15th and 16th and 17th centuries.
correct, correct. And you're again bringing up multiple things that are happening inside of my brain. One, I sent you over a couple of Metz pieces as well, and Mike Metz does fantastic work in what is happening inside of the classrooms in terms of standard English conventions. But what I think is fascinating about his work is he calls it standardized and adds the
Mhm.
EE on the end to really show that something has happened to it. This is not a something that just exists. Like this is the standard because it is the standard. There's a verb that has happened to it more often than not, colonization. There is something that has happened to this language to make it the way it is, which I think is subtle but is so important. Is
Mhm.
just so important. And one of the things that I do whenever I present over language at conferences is I will play three versions of the Lord's Prayer. And so I'll take them from Old English to Middle English to the contemporary English that we use today. And as I swing through, they will start to recognize some words. And then, of course, by the time it gets to the contemporary version, they recognize it. And so I ask them, do you think that anything was wrong with any of those versions of English? And they're like, of course not. And then I say, well, wait a minute. Well, why, when you can look at it from a historical lens, everything is fine. But when we look at it from a here's where language is moving or here's where language can go, then there's some resistance. And it is not just because people are afraid of the unknown. There is a lot of power dynamics that are wrapped around who gets to control language and who gets to approve its movement and how there's just so much wrapped into it. And I think when I do that activity, it really forces people to go, wow, I do have an extreme bias around how language operates. And I want language to stay the way that it is right now because I can control it. If I can control and gatekeep, there's no issues, especially as a teacher, which teachers are gatekeeper number one of things like language use. And
Mhm.
so you bring up an excellent point about the multiple Englishes. And there are even terms, it's probably not in the same article, but we use the term languaging. Like
Mhm.
anytime you are using English in its multiple forms, you are languaging and showing its multiplicity, showing its flexibility on how it can operate, especially within particular um, what I call particular rhetorical situations.
Mhm. I mean, that also makes me consider the thought processes behind accents and what accents we consider proper and which ones we consider lower class. And like you think about movies, and if there's someone who's smart in a movie, they're going to be British, and if there's someone who's dumb in a movie, they're going to be Southern. And
Yeah,
it's and it I mean, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so we grew up in a mind space of, oh, Southern people are stupid. Look at how they sound. Isn't that dumb? And it's the same language, even generally
Yeah,
speaking. I mean, there are colloquialisms and regionalisms, but it's
right.
roughly the same language in the same country, just a different accent. And yet, if someone were to get up in front of us with a Southern accent, we would immediately have checked out because we were like, oh, they don't have anything important to say because they're from the South.
Yes, yes, that's the perfect example. That's a perfect example, especially to someone who is not in a position to have discourse around racial racial linguistic ideologies that exist. That's a great starting conversation. I think it's anybody who's listening, watching this. If you are wanting to sort of approach some of those conversations, that's a good middle ground to me, because that is, I hate to use the word true, but that is sort of a commonplace thought in terms
Mm,
of, like you said, like how we even cast people. And again, in my work, I'm also more interested in how you don't even have to see a person, but you hear them and you've applied some sort of visual characteristics to them, which then launch you into everything that you believe about that particular type of person, which I think
yep.
is it's incredibly important for us to name those biases and work to um, unclaim those biases.
Mm. Well, I mean, even to the point where in the 1930s they invented an accent to make sure that everyone spoke exactly the same. Like the transatlantic accent is not a real thing. It was an invented thing that allowed radio broadcasters supposedly to be understood better, quote unquote, across multiple continents, when really what they were trying to do was say, no, this is how you speak. And if anyone speaks any different
Right.
than this, they aren't good people.
Correct.
And of
Correct.
course, that accent, when you think of those accents, you're not thinking of people from the time who were of color. You're thinking of Katharine Hepburn, you're thinking of FDR, even as recent as JFK. Like you're thinking very upper class, very white people.
Correct. 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 Which is also a point that I am sure to point out when I talk about the sort of emergence of dictionaries and the emergence of grammar books, is that the language at the time was not codified in everyday speech. It wasn't codified as, the vernacular that people were actually using. There was a particular choosing of words that were being used by the elite, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is even a stopping point right there. Like, even if we talk about just that tiny fact, why might that be the case? And then something you brought up earlier, why are we then holding ourselves to the same grammar rules of the elite and the bourgeoisie, of 17 XXX?
I mean, literally, like, and to the point where we read documents from the 1600s, and there'll be a word here and there that we understand, but we're not going to sit there and understand every single thing they're saying. We're going to have to take time to break it down, and yet we're still holding ourselves to those standards. Maybe not the spellings, but definitely to how they formed their sentences. And it's like these were people who we know and acknowledge were oppressing everyone else. Why do we care what they had to say about our language?
Yeah, and even spelling that gets under my skin too, because just even the way that the English language operates, some of the spelling just phonologically doesn't make sense.
Have people never read Shakespeare? Like his spelling was all over the place. He would spell the same word on the same page different ways.
and and I try to remind people that the introduction of the printing press, um,
Mm.
when people were making money per line, some words were just extended just to get to the other line. And so we're upholding people to these rules, not really knowing the history of them and not tracing them down to go, oh, you know what, that's actually not that's not as unimportant of a rule as I assumed, and this kid isn't committing some huge crime by not following it to a T.
Yeah. And that's why word counts sometimes get on my nerves too, just as a student. Like
Yeah,
dissertations, I totally get because you do absolutely need that much space to to
to
get
really,
to a point.
yeah, I get
Uh,
it.
but when it comes to novels, like there's I can remember a time where I would go to a bookstore and just look for the thickest book and be like, the longer it is, the better it must be.
Of
Just
course.
because so many classics are so long, until you start to realize, oh, that's because they were paid by the word. Like Charles Dickens was paid by the word to release a chapter each week. Of course, it was going to be long. Of course, there were going to be hundreds of characters because
Correct.
he wanted money.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's my
So many
lifelong.
things,
Yeah.
so many things that are so based in unnecessary biases.
Hmm.
Unnecessary. And then the languages that we have, like Creole or Pidgin English in Hawaii, that are languages in and of themselves, but they're so looked down upon by people who speak English just because it's mixed in with words from other languages. And I mean, Creole is mixed in with words from like 4 or 5 languages. Like it's not even just
Right.
one or two.
Which I think people misunderstand the definition of Creole in the first place, which is just that. Like it's this
Yep.
mix of 3 or more of something. So there's just such beauty in that. And even I think
Mhm.
again, recognizing my privilege, um, even when I say things like, "Oh, yeah, they're looked down upon people that speak English." Well, some of them are speaking English too, but it's become so normalized that our English is the English. There could never be another English.
Mhm.
And so, my colleagues and I will refer to, when we're being very specific and very tight, we'll call it mainstream English, or,
Mhm.
white mainstream English, or something, just to those subtle things give value to whatever other
Mhm.
English is happening, and at the same time. And it's I think that's where my nerdiness really comes out, is because when I listen to people talk about English, i.e., teachers talk about English, I have to remind them over and over. Well, that's English too. Well, that's English too. That's English too.
Mhm.
Like just forms, and I think that's the hardest part about getting
Yeah.
people to. It is not separated. It's not slang. It is. It is. It is rule bound, system bound, syntactically bound, grammatically bound English.
I mean, and that also brings up questions for me in terms of there have been so many conversations lately about um and I'm going to use the outdated term because I can't remember the term that you said to use instead,
Sure.
but about AAVE being
Sure.
co-opted by white people, especially in social media. And it makes me wonder, not wonder, but it kind of brings a little bit more understanding to that, in terms of it is a different form of English, and it does come with a culture behind it. So when people who are not from that culture start using that form of English, it they're assuming that they are going to be part of that culture by using that culture's language. So it takes it out of this like, oh, don't use our word, why are you using our word thing, and more just, okay, but like you're you're saying you're part of something that you don't even understand that this language is a part of.
Yeah,
Am I wildly off base there?
I think that the rub for me is not usually the language use, or the stylistic use, because if you're in a school that's diverse and you heard a language pattern and you just picked it up, that's how language works. But what I do find a little bit of rub with, is that often it is not just the language use that is being judged, it's who's using it. So
Mm-hmm.
often when someone who is not a person of color is using a language feature of Black English or Black language, for example, they're not looked at the same. But that's not their fault. That's just a rub that I have with just general language ideologies. But then, two, I always like to remind people of color who are using, again, a feature of Black language, Black English, um, to um, just be mindful that there is a lot of history in that language and pattern use, and to if you are wanting to be, or a part of a particular culture through language use, make sure that in another scenario you are not abandoning the culture
Mm,
when it no longer serves you. That's that's
mm,
that's that's my that's my rub, because I can't, like I have friends that have children that are not children of color, and they'll ask me, they'll say, "Hey, my kid is using this, and this," and I'll say, probably been talking to a kid that is using a lot of Black English, and they'll say like, it's okay, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, they're just using the habitual be. Just you might talk to them about the habitual be at home, and probably why not to use that on the whatever state's assessment they're going to take. But I mean, it's fine. That's what we do. We language with each other.
mm. I mean, I as a queer person, had to be. I've been caught in the crossfire of that conversation many, many times because gay people have stolen a lot of language from the Black community, partially organically because of the spaces that they were kind of pushed into together
Yeah,
in especially New York. um but then as we move into modern times where we're not necessarily pushed into those spaces, but then gay, especially, it's always gay white men who are doing this, who are taking those aspects of language just because they see something online and they're like, cool, that's the new gay slang. It's like,
yeah,
but it doesn't come from the same exchange that happened originally. Like the
yeah,
it's the same, similarly, like they were of that culture at that time. Like they were speaking of
yeah.
like that because they were all hanging out together because they were in spaces that that was the only space any of them were allowed to be in,
Sure,
versus now we're
absolutely.
allowed to be anywhere. So why are we doing that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you even see that erasure of the culture, even from heterosexual members of
Mm,
that use language that historically originated from the queer community, especially the queer. Or the colored queer community. For example, I like to tell my friends this all the time. Like right now, the word "clock it" or "clocking," and I'm like, well, it's a queer term, right? No, it's not. It means such and such and such. Right. But prior to that, it meant like, is your body clockable? And then,
yeah.
like, and we
And
go
it's
through
actually kind of a rude term, in fact. Like it's like
yeah, yeah, right. So we go through things like that, and again, my nerdy language self is able to explain the history of some of those terms. But like I said,
mm,
even with the maybe the what to some people might be appropriation of Black language, I just remind people that if you're using certain terms that originated in a culture that is not yours, whatever cultural identity that is, just pay. Sorry, just pay your pay your respects in a way that acknowledges that. And
mhm.
to your best ability, try not to change the meaning if you are not a part of the culture that originated the meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I'm yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that's I uh, I have like 600 other questions for you, but that would make this episode far too long. So remembering that we're on a podcast and unfortunately
Sure,
only can keep people's attention for so long,
sure.
let us move into my synthesis questions. Do do
Okay, got
do.
got
So
you,
this
got
is
you.
just a series of questions that I ask all of my guests as a fun way to wrap up episodes. So
Okay.
question number one: what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Whew, man, when do I get a rest day? I would say my favorite just rest day activity would be so I keep a catalog of poems and short reads on Pinterest. It's called My Brooding Thoughts, and so I like to curate that. That is my favorite sit down and do nothing activity. And because I do it so often, my feed on Pinterest is full of them. Like, do I have my phone? I don't even know where my phone is to be able to show you, but I have I can see one, but I can't see the other one. Well, oh, actually, it's because it's sitting right here on my dashboard. So like if I pull up Pinterest right now, my home screen is just a bunch of like little written pieces. So like one just popped up and it's like a poem about just once. And so like I'll read through all of these short little pieces and then just go, do I want to add that to my brooding thoughts? Is that some sort of inspiration? And I'll just drop it there. And that'll be what I'll do for wherever it calms me, it calms my spirit. I recently just again, this is silly. I've been trying to figure out what so I'm not a musician by any means. I don't play anything. I never played anything. But I've fallen in love with slow jazz recently. And
Mm.
I've been trying to figure out what instrument sounds like it's whining in the background. That's the only way that I knew how to describe this. So I went
Probably
to
the clarinet.
so I went to Claude. I use Claude for my AI system of choice, and I said, Claude, what instrument sounds like it's whining? And I think it gave me the clarinet at first, and so I typed it in on Spotify, and I was like, nah, that's not quite the whining that I'm looking for. And it said, oh, it's probably the muted trumpet. And I was like, okay, whatever the muted trumpet is, and I typed it in, and it's the muted trumpet. It's the muted trumpet.
Mm.
So
The wah wah wah. Yeah.
yeah, so I will. Oh yeah, you're a music person, so I
Yeah.
will look at my Pinterest board, curate that while playing the muted trumpet in the background.
Nice. Love that. Question number 2. What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Probably the room that I'm in right now. I'm in my office area. It's an open concept though. And so I have all of my books here. I have all of like, some of my inspirations here. Like I have a David Foster Wallace quote behind me, and I have a James Baldwin picture frame behind me right here. And so I just am always using this space. Oh, I collect typewriters. So I have like 4 typewriters in this space too. And so it just kind of gives me like we're sitting down, we're working. Although sometimes working at home makes me too comfortable, and I just feel like, man,
Mm.
the couch is right there. The couch
Yep.
is right there. so, so this is probably space number one. Space number two is we live in an old courthouse in Dallas.
Wow.
Yeah. So fun fact: Roe versus Wade was argued here before it was a Supreme Court case. Yeah. So we we our common areas are courtrooms. So when I want to work in our place but not inside my house, I just go to the courtroom and I'll
That is the coolest apartment
right.
building ever.
So it still functions as a post office on floor one, but then everything else are units.
So cool.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this can be good or bad.
Ooh. Uh, I'm going to say, and I recently had this thought. Uh, the best piece of advice that an advisor has given me is them saying, I don't know, back to me.
Mm.
Because you assume that these people with all these titles and awards and publications that they know everything about everything. And that's just not true. And
No.
so if I ask a question and they say, oof, T, I don't really know, like that's not my area, or here's an article that you might could read, but I'm not really sure. It takes off some of the pressure that I have on myself to know everything about everything because I'm just that kind of person. So that has given me a lot of just,
Yeah.
or even when they ask me a question, like a lot of my professors in my language and literacy program are elementary scholars because typically that's where literacy is studied. And so me being secondary, there's only like me and maybe, 3 or 4 other people in the program that are secondary minded. So they might come to me and ask me a secondary minded question. So even those things just make me feel like we're all human. We're all just learning alongside each other.
We sure are. Oof. If only we weren't. Um, if you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
Ooh. Um, if I were not in this position, I probably would have went a sciencey route. I
Mm.
know that sounds. Well, and I say sciencey as if literacy isn't a science of its own. What I mean is like a more objective science. So I'm very interested in how the body works, very interested in how your brain
Mm.
works, but from a sciencey level, like a neuroscience positionality. Very interested in like your skeletal system. My fiance is an athletic trainer, so right up my alley.
Hmm.
For us to talk about those things, so it probably would have been something super, super sciencey, like.
Nice. Nice. Who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
Oof, there's so many. Um, I would say I'm a huge Mike Metz fan, which is one of the articles that I sent over. Uh, but somebody different outside of that, I would say really interested in the work of James Paul G. I'm gonna say like that's kind of my guy. He's a discourse analysis person, and that's my chosen methodology for pretty much everything. I do it just by habit now, consistently analyzing the way someone speaks, the way they behave in a particular situation to be a part of a particular group. That is supremely fascinating to me. The lengths to which people will go to be a part of a community of practice is interesting. And so that's a part of my methodology skill. My methodological skills is just taking even like a sentence and breaking it down into what assumptions are being made here, where is the verb, where are the adjectives placed, and what effect does that have on the entire sentence into the entire situation. So I am just that nerdy about
That's
grammatical.
amazing.
Yeah.
That is truly very cool. I'm going to be looking him up because that just got me really excited.
Yeah, I mean, one of the shortest sentences that I use in examples of discourse analysis is Nike's "Just Do It" slogan.
Mm,
There is no subject in it, and so it is an implied you need to just do it. But it is, when you don't have a subject, it is a command, like
mhm,
there are no other options. And so then when you think about that in like an American sense, and I ask, why might a slogan like this be so beneficial? Because there is this assumption in America that everybody can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. There are no other factors that keep you from just doing it. And so it gives you this falsified sense of the American vision of I can do
mhm.
anything and everything. I've never ran in my entire life, but I can get these Nike shoes and be able to just do it just off the strength of buying whatever this product is. And so, in those three words, you can unravel an entire system of belief, an entire system of ideology that is present within the system in which that slogan existed. So, that's the type of work that I'm
So
interested
cool. What is one question you've never been able to answer?
in. Ooh. Um, it would probably have to be something to do with how do you um, what are the pedagogical steps towards helping elementary students be critical language awareness folks?
Mm,
Because at the secondary level, I can pretty much work through, 6 through 12. I got you. I'm But fifth down, I am not really hip to all of the literacy practices and pedagogical moves that there are in elementary. But I imagine that some of the things that I so easily do at the secondary level would be very hard to duplicate at the lower
yeah.
elementary.
And then the last question is, what font do you wish you could present your research in?
Oh, that is good. So this is gonna sound silly and so plain, but I actually really just like Arial.
Okay.
Like the Times New Roman is cool too. But so remember, I type a lot of my work on a typewriter before it becomes something that's published. So whatever that old school typewriter type text is always gonna get my attention over the
Mm,
fancy.
that's totally fair. And where can people find you online
Oh,
and
sure.
the thing done?
Sure. So, Instagram and TikTok are my places where you can find me the most. So on TikTok, I mostly just do language lectures, which is how you and I met. And my name there is the Trill, Trill Professor. Trill being the hip hop word of too real. It's something that we use in the southern states. And then on Instagram, the same, the Trill Professor. I use both names in both places. On Instagram, I'm more of just a real person. Like, it's my day to day. I'm at the gym. I am now shopping. I am now, but but on TikTok, that's where my nerdy self is really just allowed to romp around. So you get this little multiplicity of me as a person in both spaces.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And we will talk to you all later. Bye. What did I tell you? That was such a fascinating conversation, at least to me. I love discussing the ins and outs of grammar and how people speak and why people speak the way they do. So I really hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Thank you so much, Travis, for being a guest on the podcast. And I really, really look forward to seeing where your research takes you next. Thank you all for joining me on this episode, for joining me and my guest on this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. And I hope that you enjoyed it enough to share it with your friends, because that's what it's all about. We cannot demystify education and academia unless we spread the word. So please share with your friends. If you have any questions for myself or my guests, please feel free to submit them to our Instagram. That's at hypothesispod. Or you can email them to us at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. That's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or you can submit an audio question to us on speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. As always, the articles discussed in today's episodes are available on my Substack. That's iramcintosh.substack.com. Again, that's iramcintosh.substack.com. Please follow all of our socials. Like I said, the podcast Instagram is at hypothesispod. You can also find myself on Instagram at Ira A. McIntosh, or on TikTok at The Gay Ethnographer. You can also find me on YouTube at The Gay Ethnographer. If you'd like to watch the video versions of podcasts rather than listen to them, you can find those on my YouTube channel or on the Substack page. Please, please, please subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. And if you didn't know, when you're listening to a podcast, you need to download the episode when you listen to it in order for it to count on the back-end numbers. And those back-end numbers help us to know what episodes do well, what people want to hear, and eventually, if we want to join a network or find other ways to gather support from our listeners, those numbers are so helpful to us. So please, please, please download episodes, subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. Let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book. Bye.